Smoke filled the air as Reed Thompson crawled through the rubble of what used to be a beautiful temple. His rifle felt heavy in his hands, and blood dripped from a cut on his forehead. Around him, the ancient stones of Pyros lay broken and burning. The dragons were losing this war, and Reed knew it. He had come to this world 6 months ago with his mercenary unit. The pay was good, and the dragons treated humans fairly, better than most species did. Reed never expected to care about these giant flying creatures, but something changed when he saw how they protected the smaller beings on their world. Dragons didn't just fight for territory or resources. They fought to keep others safe. A loud crash echoed through the ruined temple. Reed pressed himself against a fallen pillar and listened. The sound came again, like metal scraping against stone. One of those massive war titans was getting closer. The hegemony had brought 12 of the giant machines to Pyros. Each one was the size of a city block and packed with enough firepower to level mountains. Reed had watched 11 dragons fall today. Ancient beings who had lived for thousands of years, reduced to ash and memory in mere hours. The last dragon, an elder named Sage, had told the others to retreat to the nursery caves. "Protect the young ones," she had said with her deep mental voice that somehow reached into Reed's mind. "They are our future." But Sage was gone now, too. Reed had seen her massive form crash into the valley below, her silver scales no longer shining. The war titan that killed her was moving toward the nursery, its pilot probably thinking the job was almost done. Reed forced himself to stand and keep moving. His legs shook with exhaustion, but he had to reach the caves. Maybe he could buy the dragon children some time to escape. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all he had. The nursery cave sat carved into the side of a cliff. Reed had visited them once during a peaceful moment in the war. Baby dragons no bigger than house cats, played among crystalline formations that glowed with soft light. Their adult guardians had watched them with such gentle pride. Now Reed could hear the young dragons crying out in fear as explosions shook the mountainside. Reed climbed the rocky path as fast as his tired body would allow. Below in the valley, the war titan called Devourer's Edge moved like a mechanical mountain, its weapons charged with deadly energy, preparing for the final strike. Reed knew the pilot inside that machine. War Commander Threk had a reputation for efficiency. The Kroth warrior had destroyed over 50 worlds for the hegemony. He never left survivors. The cave entrance came into view, partially blocked by fallen rocks. Reed squeezed through the gap and found himself in a scene of heartbreak. Dozens of baby dragons huddled together in the glowing chambers. They were beautiful creatures with scales that shimmered like jewels and eyes full of intelligence. Some were no bigger than Reed's fist, while others had grown to the size of dogs. All of them looked terrified. Reed moved deeper into the cave, searching for any adult dragons who might have survived. He found none. The nursery guardians had died, defending the entrance, their bodies blocking the path to slow down any attackers. Reed was alone with children who couldn't protect themselves. The walls shook as the war titan approached. Dust fell from the ceiling, and several baby dragons cried out in their high, musical voices. Reed realized with growing horror that these youngsters were trying to communicate with him, but he couldn't understand their telepathic speech the way adults could. Then one small dragon separated herself from the group. Her scales were deep red like burning coals, and she moved with purpose toward Reed. Unlike the others, she opened her mouth and spoke actual words. "You are Reed Thompson," she said in clear human English. "You came here to help us." Reed nearly dropped his rifle in shock. Dragons didn't speak out loud. They had never needed to learn human languages because their telepathy worked with most species. Yet this little creature was talking to him as easily as any human child might. "How do you know my name?" Reed asked. "How can you speak?" The little dragon tilted her head in a very human gesture. "I learned by watching you and your friends. I listened to your words and remembered them. My name is Ember." Before Reed could respond, a massive shadow fell across the cave entrance. The war titan had arrived. Through the gaps in the fallen rocks, Reed could see part of the machine's hull. Weapon systems hummed to life, preparing to blast the cave. into dust along with everything inside it. Ember looked at the blocked entrance, then back at Reed. "The metal giant will kill us all," she said with surprising calmness for such a young creature. "Unless someone asks it not to." "Dragons don't surrender to the hegemony," Reed said. "Your people have never begged for mercy." "But I am not like other dragons," Ember replied. "I can speak to the pilot in ways he will understand." Reed stared at the small dragon. She was barely the size of a large cat, with wings that couldn't possibly carry her very far. What could she do against a war titan that had already killed dozens of her elders? The cave shook again as the war titan's sensors scanned the area. In moments, those weapons would fire and turn the nursery into a crater. Reed made a decision that went against everything he knew about warfare and survival. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Ember spread her tiny wings. "Help me reach the metal giant. I must speak to the one inside." Reed looked at the blocked entrance, then at his equipment. He had climbing gear and explosives. If he could blast a hole big enough for Ember to fly through, she might reach the war titan before it fired. It was an insane plan, but Reed had run out of sane options. He placed charges at strategic points around the cave entrance while Ember waited patiently. The other baby dragons watched with wide eyes, somehow understanding that their fate rested on this desperate gamble. "Ready?" Reed asked as he prepared to trigger the explosives. Ember nodded. "The pilot's name is Threk. He has destroyed many worlds, but perhaps he has never been asked to stop." Reed detonated the charges. Rock and dust exploded outward, creating a gap in the cave wall. Ember shot through the opening like a red comet, her small form flying directly toward the massive war titan's viewing port. Through his rifle scope, Reed watched the impossible scene unfold. The tiny dragon hovered in front of the giant machine's main window, her voice somehow carrying across the comm frequencies that filled the battlefield. "Please," Ember said in her clear young voice. They were only children. The war titan stopped moving, its weapons powered down, and in that moment of silence, Reed realized that everything in the galaxy was about to change. War Commander Threk sat frozen in his pilot chair, staring at the small red dragon floating outside his view screen. In 300 years of conquest, nothing had prepared him for this moment. His massive hands, designed for crushing enemies, trembled slightly on the control panels. The dragon spoke again. "Please," she repeated. "They were only children." Threk's mind raced through decades of hegemony training. The doctrine was clear: eliminate all resistance, show no mercy, complete the mission. But the creature outside wasn't showing resistance. She was asking for something no being had ever asked Threk before. She was asking him to choose compassion over duty. His comm system crackled with incoming messages from Hegemony Command. "Devourer's Edge report status. Why have you stopped firing?" The voice belonged to Admiral Voss, his superior officer watching the battle from orbit. Threk didn't answer. He kept staring at the dragon, who hovered patiently despite the massive weapons pointed at her. She was so small compared to his war titan. One blast from his primary cannon would vaporize her instantly. Yet she showed no fear. "You understand me," the dragon said, and Threk realized she was right. Somehow her words reached directly into his mind, translated not just into his language but into meaning itself. "You know I speak truth." Through his external sensors, Threk became aware of another presence. A human soldier had emerged from the cave entrance, his rifle trained on the war titan. The man was speaking into a comm device, his words broadcasting on open frequencies. "She's asking for mercy," the human said. "When was the last time anyone asked you for that, Commander Threk?" The question hit Threk like a physical blow. Reed Thompson was right. In centuries of warfare, beings had begged for their lives, screamed, threats, offered bribes, or fought to the death. But no one had simply asked him to be merciful. No one had believed he might choose kindness over killing. Threk activated his external speakers. "I am War Commander Threk of the Hegemony 4th Fleet. You are enemy combatants on a condemned world. Surrender is not possible." "I do not ask you to surrender," the small dragon replied. "I ask you to remember what it feels like to protect instead of destroy." The word stirred something deep in Threk's memory. Long ago, before joining the hegemony military, he had been something else. His people, the Kroth, had once been explorers and builders. They created beautiful cities and helped other species solve problems. But the hegemony had found them during a civil war and offered them a choice: join the conquest fleet or be conquered themselves. Threk had chosen service over slavery. Most of his people had. They became some of the hegemony's most effective soldiers because they understood loss. But somewhere in the process of becoming warriors, they had forgotten how to be protectors. Commander, respond immediately or face. Court-martial. Admiral Voss's voice cut through his thoughts. Complete your mission. Instead of answering his superior, Threk opened a direct channel to the dragon. What are you? My name is Ember. I am the last speaker for my people. The adults could only talk mind to mind, but I learned the old ways. I learned words that cross between species so that understanding might survive. Threk's sensors detected movement in the cave behind the dragon. More young dragons were emerging, following Ember's lead. They couldn't speak aloud like she could, but their telepathic voices somehow reached him too, translated through Ember's unique abilities. They shared images and feelings instead of words. He saw memories of dragon civilization, ancient beings, working alongside dozens of different species, mediating conflicts, sharing knowledge, protecting worlds from cosmic disasters. Dragons hadn't been conquerors. They had been gardeners, cultivating peace across the galaxy. The images showed partnerships with creatures Threk recognized, species the hegemony had labeled as extinct or scattered. But in the dragon memories, they were alive and thriving on hidden worlds. The hegemony hadn't won as completely as their leaders claimed. This is impossible, Threk whispered. These species were eliminated centuries ago. Ember flew closer to his view screen. They were saved centuries ago, hidden away until the galaxy might be ready for peace again. My people hoped that day would come through understanding, not war. Read. Thompson's voice crackled over the comm again. The dragons have been playing a longer game than any of us realized, Commander. They've been preserving what the hegemony tried to destroy. Threk looked at his weapon controls, then back at the small dragon. His training told him to fire. His orders demanded completion of the mission. But something deeper, something he had, buried under years of military conditioning, whispered a different choice. Show me, he said finally. Show me these hidden worlds. Ember tilted her head. You would need to come with us. Your war titan cannot travel where we must go, but if you truly wish to see, there is a way. Threk's mind reeled at the implications. Abandoning his war titan meant abandoning his rank, his career, his entire identity as a hegemony officer. It meant becoming a traitor in the eyes of his own people. But it also meant the possibility of becoming something he had forgotten he could be. A protector instead of a destroyer. Commander Threk, this is your final warning, Admiral Voss transmitted. Complete your mission or we will consider you compromised. Threk made his decision. He powered down all weapon systems and activated his War Titan's emergency beacon. This is Commander Threk. I am declaring Devourer's Edge a non-combat vessel. I request immediate medical evacuation for psychological evaluation. It was a lie, but it would buy him time. The hegemony would send a recovery team instead of immediately branding him a traitor. Reed Thompson emerged fully from the cave, his rifle lowered. You're really doing this? You're going to help them? I do not know what I am doing, Threk admitted, but I know I cannot destroy children who ask for mercy. Ember performed what could only be described as a smile, though she had no lips. Then, come with us, War Commander. Let me show you what your people were like before they forgot how to build instead of break. Threk began the complex process of shutting down his War Titan systems and preparing to abandon the massive machine. As he worked, he opened his comm to broadcast on all hegemony military frequencies. This is War Commander Threk to all hegemony forces. I have encountered something that changes everything we believed about this war. The species we thought we had defeated are not gone. They are waiting. And they are offering us a choice. He paused, looking at Ember floating patiently outside his view screen. I am choosing to learn what they have to teach. Any who wish to understand what we have really been fighting for should follow my beacon coordinates. Admiral Voss's response was immediate and furious. Threk, you are hereby declared a traitor to the hegemony. All units, destroy Devourer's Edge immediately. But Threk was already opening his War Titan's emergency hatch, stepping into the alien air of Pyros for the first time. Reed Thompson stood waiting with Ember perched on his shoulder. Where do we go now? Threk asked, looking up at the sky where hegemony ships were already moving to intercept them. Ember spread her small wings. To the place where all lost things are kept safe. To the archive of what the galaxy was before fear taught us to destroy each other. As explosions began to light up the sky behind them, the three unlikely allies ran toward a future none of them could have imagined. A Kroth war commander, a human mercenary, and a baby dragon who spoke the language of hope in a galaxy that had almost forgotten what hope sounded like. The real war was just beginning, but for the first time in centuries it wasn't a war of conquest. It was a war for the soul of the galaxy itself. 3 days after abandoning his War Titan, Threk found himself crammed into the cargo hold of a battered human transport ship. The vessel belonged to Reed's mercenary unit, and it was never designed to carry a 9-foot-tall Kroth warrior. Every time the ship changed course, Threk had to duck to avoid hitting his head on the support beams. Ember rode on Reed's shoulder, her red scales catching the dim light of the cargo bay. She had grown noticeably larger since their escape from Pyros, though she was still small enough to fit in Reed's arms. The other baby dragons from the nursery were secured in specially built carriers, their crystalline bedding glowing softly in the darkness. Hegemony pursuit ships are gaining on us, announced Holly, Reed's pilot and the closest thing his unit had to a leader. She was a tough woman with graying hair and scars from a dozen campaigns. At current speed, they'll intercept us in 6 hours. Reed studied the star charts projected on a small screen. How far to this archive that Ember keeps talking about? Ember closed her eyes, connecting mentally with something beyond the ship. 2 more jumps through hyperspace. But we must reach the broken field first. The path is hidden there. Threk shifted uncomfortably. The broken field was an asteroid cluster that appeared on no hegemony charts. According to official records, it was empty space marked as a navigation hazard. But Ember insisted it contained the entrance to the Dragon Sanctuary network. Tell me again why we're trusting a baby dragon with our lives, Holly called from the cockpit. Because she's the only one who knows where we're going, Reed replied. He scratched behind Ember's tiny horns, a gesture that made her purr like a cat. Besides, would you rather face whatever's in that asteroid field? Or explain to Admiral Voss why we helped a hegemony commander defect? Threk winced at the reminder. His former fleet was now hunting him with the same efficiency they had once brought to conquering worlds. 3 War Titans and a dozen support ships were closing the distance between them and safety. But something had changed during their flight from Pyros. Threk had received encrypted messages on his personal comm device. Other hegemony officers were asking questions. His broadcast before abandoning Devourer's Edge had reached further than Admiral Voss wanted to admit. Commander Threk, one message had read. This is Captain Morris of the War Titan Eternal Hammer. Your words about choice have caused discussion among my crew. If what you discovered is real, some of us would like to know more. Another message came from Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, a human officer in the Hegemony Marines. Sir, my unit has been asking about the dragon children you mentioned. Command says they were just animals, but your description suggests otherwise. We've seen what happens when the hegemony lies about species intelligence. Most telling of all was a short transmission from War Commander Kane, Threk's oldest friend in the service. Threk, they're calling you insane. But I remember what you were like before we joined this war machine. If you found something worth betraying everything for, maybe it's something worth saving. Threk shared these messages with Reed and Ember. The small dragon listened with growing excitement. More of your people are ready to choose, she said. The archive will be pleased. It has waited so long for this moment. What exactly is this archive? Reed asked. You keep talking about it like it's alive. Ember's eyes glowed brighter. In a way, it is. The archive is where the dragons kept everything the galaxy was before the hegemony began its conquest. Not just species and worlds, but ideas, ways of living together that don't require anyone to be conquered. The ship shuddered as Holly pushed the engines beyond their safe limits. Through the small porthole, Threk could see the first signs of the broken field. Asteroids tumbled slowly in the darkness, many of them showing strange geometric patterns that looked almost artificial. Those aren't natural formations, Holly called back to them. Some of these rocks have been carved. Ember stood on Reed's shoulder and pressed her small claws against the porthole. The dragons did not create the archive alone. Many species worked together to build it. Each asteroid holds part of the design. As they flew deeper into the field, the carved patterns became more obvious. What Threk had first taken for random space debris revealed itself as a massive three-dimensional puzzle. The asteroids were positioned to create channels and passages, a maze that would confuse any ship that didn't know the correct path. Turn left at the asteroid shaped like a flower, Ember instructed. Then right where the path splits around the twin rocks. Holly followed the dragon's directions, though she muttered complaints about navigating by the advice of someone who had never piloted a spaceship. But Ember's guidance proved accurate. Each turn led them deeper into the maze, past asteroids that held increasingly complex carvings. Threk began to recognize some of the symbols. They belonged to species the hegemony had conquered decades ago. Races that supposedly had no spacefaring technology, yet here was evidence of their advanced engineering preserved in stone and metal. How long has this place existed, he asked. The archive began growing 700 years ago, Ember replied, when the dragons realized the hegemony would never stop expanding through conquest. They reached out to every species that might be threatened and offered them a choice: hide and preserve or fight and be destroyed. Reed studied the carvings as they passed. So all this time, while the hegemony thought they were winning, there was another civilization growing in secret. Not another civilization, Ember corrected. The same civilization the galaxy had before fear taught everyone to build walls instead of bridges. Their ship's sensors detected something massive ahead. As they rounded a particularly large asteroid, the archive revealed itself. Threk had expected another space station or perhaps a hidden planet. What he saw defied both expectations. The archive was a living thing. Vast organic structures grew between and through dozens of asteroids, creating a network of chambers and passages that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Ships of every conceivable design were docked at various points, their hulls showing wear from long journeys across the galaxy. By the depths, Threk whispered in his native language. How many species are represented here? All of them, Ember said simply. Every species the hegemony believes it destroyed. Every culture that chose preservation over extinction. Every being that remembered what the galaxy was like when cooperation was stronger than conquest. Holly guided their ship toward what appeared to be a docking bay carved into one of the larger organic structures. As they approached, Threk saw other ships arriving. Some he recognized as stolen hegemony vessels. Others belonged to designs he had never seen before. More defectors, Reed observed. Your broadcast is having an effect, Threk. Before Threk could respond, their ship's comm system activated. A voice spoke in perfect hegemony standard, but with an accent Threk hadn't heard in centuries. Welcome to the archive, War Commander Threk. I am Administrator Chen speaking for the Preservation Council. We have been waiting for someone like you for a very long time. The voice paused, and Threk heard other voices in the background, multiple species talking in harmony rather than the rigid hierarchy he was used to. We understand you have questions about what the hegemony has really been fighting. We have answers. But more importantly, we have a choice to offer you. The same choice we have offered every being who finds their way here. Ember flew from Reed's shoulder to hover in front of Threk's face. Are you ready to see what the galaxy chose to save? Outside their ship, the archive pulsed with welcoming light. Dozens of species moved through its corridors, working together on projects Threk couldn't begin to understand. For the first time, in centuries, he was about to enter a place where war was not the primary organizing principle of society. Behind them in space, Hegemony pursuit ships were still several hours away. But Threk realized it didn't matter anymore. Even if they never escaped, even if Admiral Voss found and destroyed the archive, the knowledge would survive. Too many people had heard Ember's words now. Too many hegemony officers were asking questions. The galaxy was remembering what it had been before conquest became the only language anyone spoke. And once that memory awakened, no amount of military force could put it back to sleep. As their ship settled into the docking bay, Threk prepared to step into a future where his size and strength would be used for building rather than breaking. Where his tactical mind would solve problems instead of creating them. Where a war commander could become something he had never imagined possible. A guardian of peace instead of an agent of destruction. The real war for the galaxy's soul was about to begin, and for the first time in his long military career, Threk was fighting on the side of hope. The first thing Threk noticed about the archive was the silence. Not the empty silence of dead space, but the peaceful quiet of a library where thousands of beings worked together without shouting orders or demanding reports. His heavy footsteps echoed through corridors that pulsed with gentle bioluminescent light, drawing curious glances from creatures he had never seen before. Administrator Chen met them at the docking bay entrance. She was human, but older than any human Threk had encountered in hegemony space. Her gray hair was woven with small crystals that seemed to store light, and her eyes held the depth of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall. "War Commander," she said, offering a greeting gesture that Threk recognized from his own people's ancient customs, or should I say, former War Commander. "Welcome to what your people were before they learned to fear difference." Ember flew from Reed's shoulder to perch on Chen's outstretched arm. The administrator smiled as the small dragon nuzzled against her neck with obvious affection. "Ember has done well," Chen continued. "Her mission was more dangerous than we had hoped, but the results exceed our expectations. 3 more war titans defected during your journey here. Their crews are requesting sanctuary and knowledge exchange." Reed looked around at the bustling corridor. Beings of dozens of species moved past them, some carrying strange devices. Others engaged in animated conversations using a mixture of spoken words and telepathic communication. How is this possible? The hegemony has records of every species they've encountered. Most of these people should be extinct. Chen gestured for them to follow her deeper into the archive. The hegemony keeps very thorough records of what they destroy. They keep no records at all of what escapes. Come, let me show you what 7 centuries of preservation looks like. They walked through passages that seemed to grow and shift around them. The archive wasn't built so much as cultivated, with living walls that responded to the needs of its inhabitants. Threk saw workshops where beings worked on technologies he couldn't identify, laboratories where different species shared knowledge freely, and gardens where plants from dozens of worlds grew in harmony. "This is impossible," Threk muttered. "The logistics alone, feeding this many people, providing life support for so many different atmospheric requirements, maintaining order without military discipline. You're thinking like a conqueror," Chen said gently. "When species choose to work together instead of compete for dominance, the impossible becomes merely complicated. And complicated problems have solutions when enough minds collaborate." They entered a vast chamber where the walls displayed star maps unlike anything in hegemony databases. Thousands of systems glowed with different colors, creating patterns that seemed to pulse with life. "Blue systems are hegemony-controlled," Chen explained. "Red systems are openly rebellious. Yellow systems are neutral or uninhabited. And green systems—" "There are so many green systems," Reed breathed. "The hegemony maps show most of those as empty space or dangerous navigation hazards." "Green systems are archive protectorates," Chen said. "Worlds where species the hegemony believes extinct have rebuilt their civilizations. Planets where refugees from conquered worlds have found new homes. Star systems where the old ways of cooperation and mutual aid still flourish." Ember flew from Chen's arm to hover near the star map. As she approached different green systems, holographic displays appeared showing bustling worlds full of life, cities built in harmony with natural environments, space stations where multiple species lived and worked together, research facilities developing technologies based on understanding rather than domination. You've been rebuilding civilization, while the hegemony thought they were destroying it, Threk said with growing amazement. Not rebuilding, Chen corrected. Preserving. The civilization that existed before the hegemony began its expansion was already based on cooperation between species. The dragons were not the only ones who believed in protecting rather than conquering. They were simply the ones with the resources and patience to organize a galaxy-wide preservation effort. She led them to another section of the chamber where a massive construction project was underway. Beings of every size and shape worked together on what appeared to be ship hulls, but unlike any vessels Threk had seen. These ships seemed to grow rather than be built, with organic curves and surfaces that pulsed with their own light. "What are you building?" Reed asked. "The same thing the hegemony builds," Chen replied. "War machines. But these are designed for protection instead of conquest, for liberation instead of subjugation. When the time comes to reveal ourselves, we will be ready." Threk studied the construction process. "You're using hegemony technology. Those power cores, the weapon systems. Where did you get them?" Chen smiled. "From every hegemony ship that ever chose to defect. From every war titan pilot who decided that protecting the innocent was more important than following orders. From every officer who brought us intelligence about hegemony weaknesses and deployment patterns. This has been planned for centuries," Threk realized. Ember wasn't just trying to save the dragon children. She was executing a strategy. Ember landed on Threk's shoulder, her weight barely noticeable despite her recent growth. "I was born for this purpose," she admitted. "Bred and trained to communicate across species barriers, to touch the conscience of those who had forgotten they possessed one. But the choice to listen was always yours." Reed frowned. "So everything that happened on Pyrrhus was manipulation?" "No," Chen said firmly. "The destruction of Pyrrhus was real. The death of the dragon elders was a genuine tragedy. Ember's fear for the nursery children was completely authentic. What was planned was the opportunity. We knew that eventually, a hegemony commander would face a situation where duty conflicted with conscience. We prepared Ember to be ready when that moment came." She gestured to the star map again. "But we never expected the response to be so immediate or so widespread. Your broadcast, Threk, reached parts of the galaxy we thought had given up hope. Rebellion movements that had been dormant for decades are awakening. Hegemony officers are questioning orders they would have followed without thought just days ago." The chamber filled with a low harmonic sound as dozens of species began communicating simultaneously. Chen listened for a moment, then turned back to them with excitement in her eyes. "Admiral Voss has arrived at the edge of the broken field with a full battle fleet, 12 war titans and 200 support vessels. He's demanding that we surrender all defectors and submit to hegemony authority." Threk felt his old military instincts activate. "We can't fight that kind of force. The archive may have hidden ships, but the hegemony fleet has enough firepower to crack planets." "Who said anything about fighting?" Chen asked with a smile that reminded Threk of Ember's expression when she had first spoken to him. "Admiral, Voss has just given us the perfect opportunity to show the galaxy what happens when someone offers the hegemony a choice instead of a challenge." She activated a communication system that reached every corner of the archive. "This is Administrator Chen to all residents and guests. Please prepare for what we have long called the Revelation Protocol. It is time to show the galaxy what they chose to preserve." Around them, the archive began to change. Walls became transparent, revealing the true scope of the installation. What Threk had thought was a single facility revealed itself as a network of interconnected structures spanning hundreds of asteroids. Ships that had been hidden in asteroid caves emerged into open space, their numbers growing from dozens to hundreds to thousands, and every ship broadcast the same message on all frequencies. "This is the Archive Preservation Network. We offer knowledge exchange, refugee sanctuary, and cooperative defense to any being who chooses understanding over conquest. Admiral Voss, your war commanders are welcome to see what their peoples were before fear taught them to destroy what they could, not control." Threk watched the display with awe and growing understanding. The archive hadn't been hiding from the hegemony. It had been preparing to reveal itself at exactly the right moment, when one small dragon's plea for mercy had reminded the galaxy that there were other choices besides conquest and submission. "What happens now?" he asked. Ember spread her wings, now large enough to actually support her weight. "Now we discover whether the galaxy is ready to remember how to build instead of break, whether warriors can choose to become guardians, whether the hegemony's greatest strength can become the foundation of something better." Outside the archive, Admiral Voss waited with enough firepower to end the preservation project forever. But for the first time in centuries, he faced an enemy that offered him something other than death or surrender. They offered him truth about what his people had been and what they might choose to become again. The real test of the archive's 700-year mission was about to begin. Admiral Voss stood on the bridge of his flagship Absolute Authority, watching the impossible sight before him through armored viewports. Where his intelligence reports had indicated empty asteroid fields, an entire civilization sparkled in the E. Darkness. Thousands of ships moved with purpose between interconnected structures that pulsed with living light. "Sir," his communications officer reported with a trembling voice, "we're receiving over 10,000 individual broadcasts. Every ship out there is transmitting on our standard military frequencies." "What are they saying?" Voss demanded. "They're inviting us to visit, sir. Each message is addressed to specific officers by name, referencing their homeworlds, their families, their service records. It's like they know everything about us." Voss felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of space. "Impossible. That information is classified at the highest levels." "Sir," another officer called from the tactical station, "I'm reading power signatures from those ships that don't match any known technology. Some of them are registering as hegemony vessels, but the energy patterns are completely different." On the main display, a face appeared that Voss recognized with shock. War Commander Kane, Threk's former colleague, was speaking from what looked like the bridge of his War Titan stellar dominance. "Admiral Voss," Kane said, his voice carrying none of the rigid formality of standard hegemony communications. "I am transmitting from within the archive network. What I have seen here changes everything we believed about our mission. I request permission to share visual records with the fleet." "Kane, you are speaking from a compromised position," Voss replied. "Return to formation immediately or be declared a hostile target." Kane's image was replaced by scenes that made Voss question his own eyes. Vast gardens where beings of dozens of species worked together tending plants from across the galaxy. Workshops where Croth engineers worked alongside species that hegemony records listed as extinct, developing technologies that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Schools where children of every conceivable form played and learned together. "This is propaganda," Voss announced to his bridge crew. "Sophisticated holographic deceptions designed to undermine our resolve." But even as he spoke, more messages arrived from his own officers. Captain Morris of Eternal Hammer reported that his crew was refusing to charge weapons. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes transmitted from his marine transport that his soldiers were asking why they were preparing to attack what looked like a peaceful research facility. Most troubling of all, War Commander Chen aboard Iron Conviction simply asked, "Sir, why haven't we ever been told that so many species survived? The archives show them as extinct, but they're clearly thriving here." Voss realized that Threk's defection had planted seeds of doubt throughout his fleet, seeds that were now blooming into open questioning of hegemony doctrine. Then a new voice cut through all the chatter, young, clear, and speaking with authority that seemed to reach directly into every mind listening. "I am Ember, speaker for the Preservation Network. Admiral Voss, I know you have orders to destroy us, but I offer you knowledge instead of battle, truth instead of conquest, the choice to learn what your people were before they forgot how to build." Voss found himself responding before his tactical training could stop him. "You are the dragon that corrupted War Commander Threk, a juvenile of a species marked for elimination. I am a child who asked for mercy and received it," Ember replied, "just as I now ask you to see what mercy can create when it is chosen over destruction." The main display changed to show the interior of what appeared to be a vast library. Beings, of every species Voss had ever encountered, and many he hadn't, worked together in harmony. But more shocking were the humans among them. Not just the scattered refugees or mercenary units that the hegemony occasionally encountered, but entire communities that seemed to have never been conquered. Earth was never fully occupied, Ember explained, somehow reading his thoughts. Your records show complete integration, but entire populations escape to archive worlds. They have been rebuilding human civilization based on cooperation instead of domination. Would you like to see what they have accomplished? The display shifted to show cities that took Voss's breath away, human architecture that seemed to grow from the landscape itself, integrated with technologies from dozens of species. Spaceports where human ships launched alongside vessels of allied civilizations. Research centers where human scientists worked, as equals with beings the hegemony had trained him to consider inferior. This is what every species in the archive has achieved, Ember continued. Not conquest of others, but mastery of cooperation. Not expansion through force, but growth through understanding. Your people, all of your peoples, had this once. You can choose to have it again. Voss's comm officer looked up from his station, with wide eyes. Sir, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 ships. They want to dock with archive facilities and request asylum. No, Voss shouted. All ships will maintain formation and prepare for assault. These are enemy deceptions designed to weaken our resolve. But even as he gave the orders, Voss could see ships breaking from his formation, not fleeing in panic but moving deliberately toward archive docking bays. His carefully organized battle fleet was dissolving as individual commanders made choices he had never imagined possible. War Commander Kane's voice returned to the comm system. Admiral, I am inside Archive Facility 7. The beings here have shown me technical specifications for every hegemony vessel class. They know our weapons, our tactics, our strategic doctrines, but they're not using this knowledge to destroy us. They're offering to teach us how to build something better. They're showing us what we gave up when we chose conquest over creation, added Captain Morris. My engineering staff is examining archive ship designs. Admiral, they're decades ahead of us in every field that matters. Energy efficiency, life support, materials science, communication technology, and they're willing to share it all freely. Voss felt control of his fleet slipping away like water through his fingers. In his decades of military service, he had never faced an enemy that fought by offering knowledge instead of threatening destruction. Sir, his tactical officer reported quietly, long-range sensors are detecting similar situations throughout hegemony space. Archive broadcasts are reaching every system simultaneously. We're receiving reports of rebellions on over 300 worlds. Garrison commanders are requesting clarification of orders regarding civilian populations that claim archive protection. The rebellion wasn't limited to his fleet. Ember's message had somehow reached across the entire galaxy, awakening questions that hegemony doctrine could no longer answer. On his display, archive ships continued their peaceful work, paying no attention to the weapons still pointed at them. Beings that should have been cowering in terror instead went about their daily lives, secure in the knowledge that they had chosen a better path than endless war. Voss realized he faced the same choice that had broken Threk. He could order his remaining loyal ships to attack, destroying this haven of cooperation and knowledge. Or he could admit that perhaps the hegemony had been wrong about what constituted strength. As he struggled with his decision, a small red dragon appeared on his view screen, her eyes bright with intelligence and compassion. Admiral, Ember said, gently, you have spent your life following orders that required you to destroy what you could not understand. But understanding is always possible if you choose to listen instead of conquer. Your people were explorers once, creators and builders. That heritage still lives within you. Will you allow it to awaken? Around Voss, his bridge crew waited for orders that would determine the fate of not just his fleet, but potentially the entire galaxy. The choice between perpetual war and the possibility of peace hung in the balance. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Voss found himself wondering what might be possible if strength was measured by what could be built, rather than What could be destroyed? The small dragon waited patiently for his answer, and in her eyes he saw reflected not just his own potential for change, but the hope of countless worlds that had been waiting centuries for this moment. The galaxy would never be the same. Whether that change led to destruction or unprecedented cooperation depended entirely on choices that beings across the stars were making in this very moment. And it had all begun with one small dragon who dared to ask for mercy instead of accepting inevitable death. The age of conquest was ending. What would rise in its place remained to be written.